Hello everybody, my name is Blimie Heller. I've been on here twice before, so you might recognize me. I'm a parenting coach and educator who is super passionate about supporting parents in building relationships with their children based on respect and trust. So I received a question for this live tonight, and the question was, what can you share with us a few things the things that you share with parents that you coach? Now, the thing is that I coach so many parents in so many different situations, and so I share so many ideas with them, really ideas depending on their situation, their scenario, and what they're looking for. So I was thinking, when I read the question, I was thinking, what should I choose? There's so many things to choose from. So I thought of two things to share that I share with parents that could be helpful to anybody listening here. So the first idea that I very, very often share with parents is this idea that our children, when they're acting out, when they're hitting, kicking, spitting, speaking disrespectfully, and they're very, not just when they say like a rude remark or something like that, but when they're really visibly upset, and that's why they're speaking in a disrespectful way, or doing something like that, then they are dysregulated, which means that their body is their brain and body are in a place where they're not receptive to being taught. So a lot of times as parents, when our children do things that they're not supposed to do, like when they're speaking in that way or when they're hitting or yelling, we very often come in with correction. Don't do that. Stop doing that. It's not the right thing to do. You're not supposed to, right? We lead with correction. And again, sometimes it makes sense to lead with correction, or sometimes it's also okay to. But very, very often what's actually more effective is to first help the child regulate. Help the child get into a space of groundedness. And the reason why, well, there's many reasons why, but one of the big reasons is that actually the part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex right here, that's responsible for a child learning the lessons that we want them to learn, for absorbing the teaching, for learning new skills, is offline when a child is dysregulated. It's just not there. And so again, if we're saying like, stop doing that or whatever, sometimes it might, a child might wake them up and they might stop or whatever, but they're not actually learning anything. So that's not the goal. Maybe is to step in and stop the child, but for correction purposes, when they're doing the action is not the time. And so I find that when I share with parents, it's very helpful because very often when the child is doing anything they're not supposed to do, we ourselves as parents have our own reaction to that. Like we become dysregulated. It's very normal and understandable actually, because our nervous system and our children's nervous systems are very connected. They mirror each other. And so when our child is having a hard time, it makes sense for us to then also have a hard time, especially if their behavior worries us or triggers us, And so we then have a hard time. And then we're not either in the right place to correct our child or to teach our child. And so if we realize in those moments, the only thing I need to do is just help my child become more grounded and help myself become more grounded. Really, it goes the other, really first help ourselves become more grounded, which then really helps our child become more grounded. If that's the only thing I need to do in those moments, and not, oh my gosh, I need to teach them right now, and if I don't teach them right now, then I've lost the opportunity and they're going to think it's okay to do it. Like we have this idea in our culture for some reason that when our child is doing the thing that they're not supposed to do, that's the best time to teach. That's the only time to teach. That's the most opportune time to teach. And if we don't, then they're going to think it's okay. And in my experience, that's really not the case at all. In those moments, they're dysregulated. Like very often we're also dysregulated. And in those moments, if we just focus on regulation, let me help this child bring them back to groundedness. Now the question is how? How do we bring them back to groundedness? There's so many ways that we can do this. But like I said, one of the big ones is bringing ourselves back to groundedness. Now, how do we bring ourselves back to groundedness? Also, there's so many different ways, but one of my favorite ways is to connect to what we're feeling inside. So rather than to react from what we're feeling inside, it's to connect to it. simply connect to it moment by moment, is to just be like, oh my gosh, I feel so frustrated that my child is doing this. Wow. And I'm also noticing I feel so worried. I just worried about this child. Like, why do they keep acting like this? And then I'm like, right. And so you just connect to what you're feeling. And that's a practice in and of itself. Like, if you realize as I'm speaking now, or maybe you don't realize, maybe I'm realizing this as I'm speaking, for every single thing I'm saying, there's so much more to understand. Like, okay, so about connecting to our feelings, what about that? What does that look like? What, how, what, actually, I just had an inspiration. I think I'm going to demonstrate. I wasn't going to do this when I first started, but I think I might take just a minute to demonstrate what it looks like to connect to what we're feeling. Because if a parent wants to learn how to connect to what they're feeling, I find that just connecting to our feelings when we're having a hard time, when we're full of frustration or worry or whatever, if we don't do it, if we don't make it a practice that we do this every day or every other day or whenever, then we're not really going to know how to do it in moments when we're when we're dysregulated or when there's a lot going on for us emotionally. So making it a daily practice of connecting to what we're feeling can really, really be supportive to us in those moments when there's a lot going on, when we're having a hard time, when our child's having a hard time. And when we then connect to our feelings, that helps us stay grounded, which then helps our children stay grounded. Obviously, there's many other ways that our children can go from dysregulated to grounded. I actually have a post on my Instagram page called 22 strategies that can help children go from dysregulated to regulated, or something like that. It's the big words on it are 22 strategies. So if you go on my page and look through my feed, you should be able to find the posts. And there's a lot of ideas there. But one of the big ones is grounding ourselves. Now, so let's talk about self-connection, about connecting to what we're feeling. When we feel an unpleasant emotion, what happens inside of us many times is that we then feel an impulse to react in a certain way, to yell, to shout, to give a silent treatment. I don't know, whatever we do. And then many of us follow that impulse. But what if we, instead of doing anything, reacting in some way, we connected to what we were feeling? We tuned inward and just connected to what we were feeling. It's really incredible, the power of doing that. So I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like for anybody who's curious and who wants to maybe try making it a practice every day, just turning on a timer for 1 minute and doing what we call self-connection, connecting to what you're feeling moment by moment. And wherever you are in your journey, whatever point you're up to, each of us are going to look different the way we do this, and that's okay. So I'm going to show you what it looks like, okay? So I'm going to just share what's going on moment by moment. Okay, so right now I feel really nervous, actually. I also notice myself feeling worried, like maybe this is boring for people. Maybe they don't want to see this, or they don't want to hear this. Yeah. And now I notice actually a sense of relaxation or relief in my body. Something about saying what's really going on inside brings me relaxation. And now I'm feeling panicked again. Yeah, worried that maybe this is not what people want to hear. Maybe this isn't contributing to people. Yeah, and actually now I feel peaceful again. Yeah, I'm actually really enjoying it. So I can go on and on, but that's basically what it looks like to just connect to what we're feeling. And like I said, if we do that, make a habit out of it, of doing it, let's say 1 minute a day or 1 minute every other day, then in moments when we're feeling a lot, we'll then be able to connect to what we're feeling. And that can really help us stay grounded. So that's one idea that I share with parents a lot, is about when our children are having a hard time, is not the time to correct. All we need to focus on is our child's regulation and our own regulation. And one of the best ways to do that is to connect to what we're feeling, which helps us stay grounded. And then another way is to help connect to what our children are feeling. But that's a whole other thing. Connecting to what our children are feeling is really another word for empathy. The other big idea I share, and I notice that we're running out of time, but I'm going to see how much I can squish in here. The other big idea that I share with parents very often is the idea that when we anytime our children do whatever they do, it's to recognize that every single behavior, and I've mentioned this before, but I feel like people can't hear it enough. Every single behavior is driven by a need. So every single human being has needs. We all have universal needs as human beings, and our behavior is driven by those needs. And very often as parents, or even as human beings with ourselves, when we do something that's hurtful, that's not okay, that hurts somebody else, ourselves, or the environment, or whatever, we very often focus on the behavior, and we'll be like, that behavior wasn't okay, and we think, how do I get rid of this behavior? And what do I do with the behavior? And when we become so fixated on only the behavior, we're actually missing out on a lot of really, really important things, which is all related to needs. The needs that drive our behavior is so important to acknowledge or to get curious about as well. Because there's so many things to say about this, but what I'll say is like this. Imagine if you did something, okay, you were really upset, and you felt like somebody wasn't listening to you, and then so you spoke really like rudely to them, okay? You know it's not the right thing to speak rudely. You regret it immediately afterwards. Now imagine somebody comes up to you and says, that was really rude. That was totally uncalled for. Now, how do you feel, right? So maybe you'll be like, yeah, that person's right. That was really rude of me. Maybe you'll feel really defensive and be like, but it wasn't okay, but like, I'm a good person. Like, I'm not a bad person. Or you might feel like, but can you see why? Like, just, I want you to understand why I did it though, right? There's usually this movement of like wanting to defend ourselves or wanting to somehow protect ourselves because we see ourselves as good people, because we are, and at our core, and so we have a hard time when somebody doesn't see that and just focuses on our behavior. Now imagine if a person, same scenario, you're rude, you know it's not the right thing to do, and somebody comes to you afterwards and says, yeah, you said something really rude before. Was it because like, were you really frustrated because like somebody wasn't like, because I wasn't hearing you, or somebody wasn't hearing you, or in some way they guessed like what was going on for you that led you to talking in that way. Not saying that it's okay that you spoke in that way, just trying to understand where you were coming from. Now imagine how you would feel, right? You would feel like, okay, this person gets it. Like, they don't think I'm a bad person. They also trust that I had a reason to do it. Of course it wasn't right, and I still feel sad and ashamed maybe that I did that, but you kind of feel more held in it, more understood, like the person really is acknowledging that they trust that you're a good person underneath it. And that really, it's not only about, it feels good or whatever, even though that is important, but that really is what supports us to then do differently in the future. If we feel like, yeah, I did a terrible thing, and then we feel so bad about ourselves, it makes it very hard for us to then do differently in the future. But if we feel like, yeah, like I had a reason for doing that, I hate the way that I went about it, I hate the way I went about being listened to or being frustrated that I'm not listened to, I wish I would have communicated that differently, but yeah, I did have something going on for me, and that's why I did it. And that way it makes it so much easier for us to then do better in the future. But also it helps us do better in the future, because if I don't know why I did what I did, then how am I supposed to know how to do what I need to do in order to get the need met that I was trying to meet? So if I don't know why I was rude, then how am I supposed to do better in the future? I don't really have anything very practical or tangible to hold on to. But if I understand, I was trying to be heard and I was frustrated that I was not heard, now it becomes very practical. So in the future, if I'm very frustrated because I'm not heard, what's another way that I can get my need met, that I can communicate that, right? And so for all those reasons and more, getting curious immediately when our children do something, getting curious about what was the need that was behind their behavior. Again, we don't know for sure. It doesn't matter. It's about guessing. Now, some of you might be like, "What? I don't know what needs are. I don't know what." So all of you can go on the website. You can even go on Google and just say like needs list, and a needs list, a universal human needs list, you can put universal human needs list, will come up. And you can use that list as a guide to guess what other people's needs are, your children specifically in this situation, to start guessing. And it's always a guess. I never assume that I know what my child's need was in that moment. Sometimes I do when it comes to like hunger, when I'm needing food. But a lot of times I guess. I'll say, is it that you wanted that? Or is it that you were trying to do this? Or is that what you were trying to accomplish? And in doing that, like I said, there's two things that are happening. Well, much more than two, but the two that I spoke about here is that it preserves the child's sense of goodness. The child gets a felt sense that you trust that underneath what they did, there were good intentions. They were trying to get a need met, and which helps them feel good about themselves, helps them do differently in the future, and also gives us something very tangible to work on. It's, if you were frustrated and you were wanting cooperation, what's a different way you can get cooperation in the future? Or if you were feeling desperate because you were wanting connection, what's a different way that you can get connection in the future? Or whatever it is, whichever behavior they engaged in was a strategy to meet a need. And so then you can always strategize with them. So if you feel this need in the future, how else can you get it met? And I really, believe that if all human beings became well versed in the language of needs, if we all started understanding, because I don't always know why I do what I do, but now that I have the framework of needs, I can get curious about what need was I trying to meet in that moment? What need was I trying to meet? And as parents, we don't only have to do this with our children, we can do it with ourselves. When we act out of alignment with our values, when we do something that we regret, we can think, what need was I trying to meet in that moment? And how can I meet it differently? And in that way, again, we make ourselves also more receptive to growth. We make it easier for ourselves to move away from shame and self-judgment into, I have so much compassion for myself that I was trying to meet that need. For example, I yelled at my child because I really was needing space. I hate that I yelled. I don't like that strategy for getting space. What's another way I can get space in the future without yelling at my child, right? And so it helps. It's just such a tangible way to improve that also really, really holds us and holds our children in moving forward and in doing better. And so that's another huge idea that I talk about. And I just actually finished giving my essentials course where I build and build and build on this idea. Like what I'm sharing here is a tiny little piece of it. And if you feel confused, that's understandable. I hope I'm sharing it in a way where you can take something from it. But the idea is to understand and to trust that there is needs underneath every behavior. And if we get curious about those needs and we acknowledge we guess what that need is, and then acknowledge what that need is, and then strategize different ways to meet that need, I find that's just so much more supportive, more supportive way to grow for our children and also for ourselves, for anyone really. So that's another huge idea that I share. Like I said, I give a course twice a year. I just gave one now, so the next one's only going to be in January. But I really, really elaborate a lot on every single point I mentioned here, like in detail, and little bit by bit, so that it's not so overwhelming and confusing. But I hope that there still was or is something that you were able to take away from what I shared tonight. If you want to hear more from me, you can always follow me on my page at Unconditional Parenting. I share more or less daily tips, ideas, different things about parenting to sort of drive these messages that I'm very passionate about home. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your questions. And until next time, bye-bye.